Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Dave from the camera store and I found a friend today and we're going to talk about the latest from Sony, the 70-200 G Master version 2. So we are joined today with Kyle Marquardt here, who is a local commercial and wildlife photographer based out of Calgary. He's a former Canon shooter who has switched to Sony recently, and we thought he'd be a great judge to sort of give his opinion on what he thinks of the brand new 70-200 2.8 G Master version 2 lens. So thanks, Kyle, for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Well, yeah, first impressions on this thing are already pretty nice. Part of the reason I was interested in Sony was just how light and mobile these things are. Normally I'm just used to getting a sore neck and just when you're carrying stuff all day, every day, yeah. The weight really matters. And that was one of the biggest things I was interested in with Sony. It's not that I was obsessed with there's so many interesting little points that are interesting about one brand or the other, but initially it was the weight. Mm-hmm. And when I first moved to Sony, the version 1 of this wasn't all that appealing. And this one gives a very interesting first impression.
Yeah, Sony's done a very good job with it. We'll get into all the boring tech specs a little bit later, but first impression here, we're going to shoot some ducks on this very cold, miserable, rainy, wet day here in Calgary. And I think there's a duck waiting for his portrait to be taken over there, Kyle. So let's go over there and check it out.
So for a 70-200, it's kind of a bread and butter lens for a lot of people.
100%, yeah, it is so important, and it's part of the Holy Trinity. It's one of the, the trifecta of lenses that most people are going to buy with very good reason.
When I think of 70-200, I think event photographers, wedding photographers. If you're photographing people in a crowd, the 70-200 is a really good range. 70 if they're a little bit closer or you want more background.
If you're a journalist, this is your lens. This is the one that's on your camera 90% of the time.
Yeah, and 2.8 at the same time. Everyone says, "Oh yeah, I have a 70-200, but I have the F4." and then when someone says,
that's when the 2.8 snobs come out.
Yeah, when they say I have the 2.8, status item.
Yeah, but also if you're shooting indoor sports or action, anything like that, you need all the advantage you can get to get these shutter speeds up to where you need it to, but also that background blur. So your first impression of this lens, what are things that are standing out for you right off the bat? I mean, you're shooting with gloves on, which I never do because I'm a fool.
Yeah, I'm shooting almost exclusively with gloves on. I want something that I can handle with my gloves, and so there's suddenly, with the extra addition of these buttons and this aperture ring, it's really quick and easy to change settings when you have basically permanent butterfingers. And so the physicality of this lens is fantastic. They're shrinking down the whole package, but at the same time, the interface is actually larger than it ever used to be with say mid-2010s lens. Yeah. There was almost nothing on it, and now I'm having settings that actually affect the camera. Nice thing is that when you develop your muscle memory, you start using parts of your camera without looking at it. You go by feel. And so if I'm at 2.8 and I'm just wait, the background's really interesting. Let's go to 8 or 9, and I can feel that without even looking. I like the physicality of a camera and the lens, and this has more than anything I've ever had before.
Now you like to get really low to the water, right, when you're shooting stuff. So you're using the rear screen a fair amount, and how are you finding the stabilization work on that? Because you're inherently less stable when you're barely balanced on the edge of a muddy bank there.
Yeah, so I'll be shooting a lot like this, and it's funny because this bottom button becomes really important because suddenly that bottom button is now programmed for my autofocus button, and then my thumb is my shutter button. So I've really changed my posture here, but I've got, instead of the 3 points on your head, which is quite stable, I suddenly have 2 points. But the way I'm gripping it, it is quite stable. But it's like an exercise, or like learning a sport to throw a ball or a frisbee or something. I have to learn how to hold the camera and how its weight changes. And the good weird thing is that normally when I switch cameras or I switch lenses, that new distribution of weight will throw my muscle memory off.
Interesting.
And I've only been using this for a few hours, and I feel like I've had this all my life.
They pushed the weight further back, closer to the lens, so it feels a lot less heavy on the far end. So when you are moving it side to side, it's much more compact.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine in rougher situations, I might notice, the first time I switched to Sony is I did notice that the cameras, because they're lighter, they move more. When it's windy, it moves more, or say I'm on a boat and it's like wiggling around, it does move more. So my optical stabilization becomes a little bit more important, or I compensated, but especially with these higher resolutions, I'm shooting at higher shutter speeds than I ever used to.
Yeah, something that people don't, they underestimate the shutter speed. Even though it's stabilized everything else, still need to watch your shutter speed with high-res cameras.
Yeah. This, just the way it's feeling now, and with these extra buttons and this aperture ring, it's starting to wow me. And I barely even looked at the photos. I almost don't even care because I like how it feels and how it's working.
I mean, I went through that with the original Canon version 1 of the 70-200. It was a really good lens for the time, but when version 2 came out, it was significantly better. And I'm finding the same with this lens here. The original version was pretty good, but this is an all-new lens that is performing exceptionally well. 40 centimeters minimum focusing distance at 70 mil.
At 70 mil.
Yeah.
And then 200 is probably a little bit less.
82 mil.
And so usually when I want to shoot up close, I just go to manual, and then I focus as close as I can.
Turn yourself into a focus rail.
Turn yourself into a focus rail. And then that way you know exactly what your limit is. It's so much easier.
Now when you're using manual focus, do you go to like focus peaking, or do you just sort of eyeball it?
Typically both. Actually, I forgot to set that on here. Usually I'll set the camera for when I switch it to manual focus, the focus peaking turns on. And then I have focus peaking set on a toggle for when it's on manual focus.
And that's the best thing about these cameras, is the ability to customize them to your shooting style, what works best for you. How did you find like the focusing speed of this lens?
The focusing speed was undeniably faster than anything I've ever used, actually. It's very, like, between, even if it was confused and it focused on the background and then the foreground, that happened really quick. Instead of going, it was, I was confused for just a millisecond instead of a long period of time. So you can't deny that the focusing speed is quite good. But you still have to be particular with your settings when you have a busy situation like this. I can't just set it to wide.
Yeah, no, as amazing as these cameras are nowadays, right, they're not infallible. If you confuse it with foliage and whatever else in front of it, it's not 100% perfect, but that's why learning your camera more and more and figuring out how you get the best results. Certainly well worth investing the time.
And when you're photographing birds, you come across these busy situations all the time, and that's where knowledge of your settings really comes in. But it kind of explains some of my bias as in why I love to shoot really close to the ground and have clear view of the bird. Suddenly the camera doesn't have a lot to be confused about. If the only thing moving in your frame is just that little bird, and then your ground is just this blur, your autofocus will never look at the ground. It doesn't care. It goes, I see something moving, I'm going to focus on that.
It's a fantastic tip. That's why your boots are so dirty.
That's why I'm so dirty.
Now, I'm always excited when a company brings out a second generation of a lens, and hopefully it's significantly updated. And in this case, it certainly is. Sony's done a fantastic job with this lens. Right off the bat, one of the headline features of this lens is the size and the weight of it. Now, the size looks about the same. However, the weight is substantially less. It's 30% lighter than its predecessor, and we're just over 1,000 grams. That's very impressive for a lens of this size. Something you're going to be using all the time is the zoom ring, and Sony has made it so it's only the 90-degree turn to go from 70 to 200 or vice versa. This is great because this lens is designed for fast action and quick motion, especially if you're working in any kind of sporting environment. Changing your framing is crucial. This allows me to very quickly acquire the framing that I like. And now when it comes to autofocus of this lens, we do have a nice focusing ring here, but it's not mechanically attached to the lens. We're not actually physically moving the elements forward or backwards to acquire focus. It is a drive-by wire, and that's because they are using linear autofocus motors. And in this case, they actually have 4 high-thrust linear actuating motors to push and pull the optics forwards and backwards. Basically, Sony has thrown everything and anything they can at this lens, both in the design of it and in the optics. And you're getting an incredibly sharp, well-controlled lens that's going to produce some fantastic quality of images.
There's 2 ways of looking at equipment. A lot of people tend to look at a spec sheet and they go, oh yes, it checks every single box. It has really fast autofocus, it's f2.8, so that's important. The actual specs of it, they're good. It does what you need a 70-200 f2.8 does. But that's not what I'm enamored with. What I really like is that it's a very tactile lens. I'm always shooting with gloves. I'm often shooting when it's really cold. So I want to be able to quickly change settings and hold the lens and be able to just control everything fairly easy. And I don't want to be using touchscreens. I don't want to be using menus or pressing tiny little buttons. I want nice big dials. And the fact that the aperture ring is the biggest dial you could ask for on a camera, it's a really nice addition. Changing your aperture is just really, really fast and easy. And I can see myself developing a muscle memory that will be able to change aperture really, really quickly without even looking, because I can feel that. And then if I was shooting video, then the fact that you can actually shut off that clicking to change the aperture is really, really cool. There's just so much flexibility there. When I'm shooting with a 70-200, I'm either shooting something at f2.8 that I want to blur out the background because I'm not interested in the background. I want to be able to get just my subject and whatever is busy or messy in the background to just blur and soften out. So with the 70-200, that's often what I'm thinking of. So perhaps if I'm shooting people as well, what if I only care about the expressions and I don't want that distracting background? People, events. If I have a shot list that includes, a person exploring the landscape at 70 mils and I'm fairly far away, that's actually somewhat of a wide angle. So this is kind of like environmental portrait lens. If you know your wildlife or your subject can get fairly close to you, then this is a really, really good range. If I was shooting polar bears off in the tundra, a 70-200 would be not the best lens for that. I want to use a 100-400 or a 200-600. So I'm often thinking of fairly controlled environments with my 70-200. So that's like a commercial photographer's bread and butter lens. People, event photography, weddings, or environmental portraits. Things where I don't have a lot of control of the background and I want that important f2.8. Or the opposite of what I was talking about before, clamping down your aperture. So shooting at f8 or 11, maybe f16. And this can actually become a fairly decent landscape lens. So imagine we were out in near the mountains, we're in the foothills. The mountains are pretty far away and they're small. If I was to say take out my phone or shoot a wide angle image, the mountains would look microscopic. But what if I have like a horse or a person in the foreground and I want those mountains to look really, really big? I'll walk away from my subject, I'll be many meters away. With the compression effect of a telephoto lens like this is really good for making those mountains look nice and big. So I might start zooming in. I might be around 100 mils or 200 mils. If I walk farther away from my subject and zoom in a little bit more at around 200 mils, then my background will start looking bigger. And so you can emphasize those mountains. So I actually might shoot with this lens a little bit more stopped down, not taking advantage of that 2.8, just because that ultimate range, 70-200, is really good for making your background a little bit bigger.
All right, Kyle, so we survived our miserable day out here in Calgary as the sleet has been starting to fall. What are your overall thoughts of this lens? If you had to sum it up really quickly.
The first thing I would say is that the way the lens actually feels. The way I use it is more than the sum of its parts. You can look at the spec sheet and say, oh yes, optically it's great. It does everything you need to do. It's really fast. But what surprises me is that what you won't see on the spec sheet is how good it feels in your hands, how easy it is to change settings. It's a lens that will do a fantastic job and it will feel fantastic.
And overall, I mean, this is one of the bread and butter working professional lenses out there that's going to be used forever and ever. And people are going to love this lens because ultimately it delivers the results it's supposed to give. It's an exceptionally sharp lens. The bokeh is fantastic out of it with the 11 aperture blades, and the functionality is brilliant on there. So I think Sony's done a fantastic job, except the price. I mean, it is a very expensive lens, but you had a really good point about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably going to keep this for a long time. It's a really well built lens. I tend to think of these as a price per year thing. If you're buying a 70-200 f2.8, it's going to be a very nice lens that should last almost forever, hopefully 10 years. So price per year, how much is it going to be making you for that long? Let's hope it lasts for 10 years or more and that you want to use it for that long. I don't see any other ways to improve the lens, so you will be happy with it. It's not like you're going to buy it and be like, oh, it has a few downsides. I don't really see that. I would probably keep this for a very long time. And so price per year, not bad.
No, very good point. I think Sony's done a great job on this end. Even though it is pricey, it's going to be your bread and butter lens for a lot of people there. So Kyle, thank you for joining us today in a review of the 70-200 G Master version 2 lens here. Hope you join us for some future episodes. It'd be fantastic to have you out here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually had a really good time. I really like being able to preview and play with this gear as well. That was a lot of fun. If any of you have any questions or want some more impressions, I'll go on social media, I'll go in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer any questions for you.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah. Leave comments down below. Make sure you follow us both on Instagram, and please subscribe, hit the notification bell. We'll catch you again next time. I really need gloves, Drew. Really need gloves. Kyle was smart. Hey, if you enjoyed this last episode and you want to check out our more recent episodes, click up here. And if you are Canadian and you want to shop local, click down here at thecamstore.com.